They've been getting cozy and they're going to get cozier, it sounds like.
Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the CommStock Channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. I'm joined today by the president of CommStock Investments, Mr. Matthew Kruse. He joins us today on a Tuesday to run through, in part, some of the latest USDA numbers for crop progress. Of course, they come out from NASS, the National Ag Statistics Service, and I guess maybe you want to walk through some of these. Would you like to take a look at the corn and soybean numbers first, or did you want to have
Yeah,
any comments before we get into it here?
let's pull them up, take a look. The areas around me in central Iowa look like they're already done already, completely
Really?
planted. But yeah,
Wow.
and USDA has 18% of corn done in the state as a whole. I'm sure more is done perhaps in southern Iowa than in northern Iowa, just because they've warmed up first. But so far, I mean, it's within the average, right, or maybe slightly above what the historical average has been. And so, I kind of talked about as long as we warmed up, depending a lot on the temperatures, right? As long as things warmed up, I think people were going to get after it, and they did. And so, we got rain coming this week, and so people just trying to get out ahead of it as much as possible. And so, we got good planning capacity as long as the weather allows us. We can get things planted really quickly. So, hopefully, we're actually supposed to start out today on my farm, and so I was going to head over there later. So I'm hoping this week we'll get mostly done. But they're showing an inch of rain on Thursday. So
It appeared to me, Matthew, from watching the weather coverage over the weekend, that it seemed like it kind of went from here in Texas up through eastern Oklahoma, eastern Kansas, and then it cut Iowa about in half, didn't it? Where the heavy rain was east and not so much where you are in the northwestern part.
I think that Oklahoma and kind of central Missouri, and then all into Illinois is probably where it got most of it. Most of Iowa got, at least the eastern half, probably an inch or two. But where we're at in northwest Iowa, we were just on the edge of it. We got like 4/10 of an inch, so we got a little something out of it, but nothing to really slow us down or anything. But yeah, I think that Oklahoma and central Missouri was where they got like up to 5 inches or more.
Yeah, if you got maybe 4/10 of an inch, I mean, that would be ideal, wouldn't it? Just to get that seed to sprout.
Yeah, we've had some rain before that, but hopefully there's more on the way. We're going to need it.
All right, well, let's take a look at the soybean numbers then. All right, 11% in Iowa, where you are. It looks like Missouri is just rolling right along. And look at the states further south. Gosh, Louisiana over half done already. That's pretty normal, I think, for down there. But, the 3 I states, how would you rank them?
I mean, slightly above average. Overall they're 8%. The 5-year average is at 5%. So they're off to a really good start. Of course that can change if we get a lot more rain yet. So I think most of the corn belt here is supposed to get 1 to 2 inches, perhaps a little bit more in some areas for the most part. So I think we're off to a good start. The earliest I've ever planted soybeans was April 23rd. I was hoping I'd break that record this year, but perhaps not. We're thinking maybe most of it's going to go in tomorrow, and so, but that's still pretty early. Better April 23rd than May 23rd, right? So, so I think everything so far so good, I'd say.
Well, in the majority of the Corn Belt, according to this particular map here, it seems like everything is going to be off to a pretty good start. I was afraid that maybe there would be quite a bit of a lag in the planting in some areas because of the heavy rains this spring. But other than right along that Ohio Valley there, it looks like things will probably get off to a pretty good start. And from what I hear, you go like from the Missouri River west, and it's just pretty much wide open. In fact, they're kind of worried about getting enough moisture to even bring it up, aren't they?
Yeah. And, it's always the question of the haves and the have-nots. I'm sure there's no doubt that there'll be places that they're going to need it to dry out, and I think what I taken a look in some of the longer term forecast, I think it'll flip flop, and some of those wet areas are probably going to start to lean drier here in May.
Well, here's a look at the wheat heading progress. Gosh, look at Texas, 47% headed already. They jumped 17% just last week. The plains, well, you're getting started in Kansas. Oklahoma's up to 20%. They made pretty good progress in their stature last week. However, you look at the wheat conditions, and if you look at the kind of a light yellow color through the plains there, all of those numbers, now what this measures is good to excellent conditions, and they're all under 50%. That means that the majority of the crop is fair or for it'd be fair to poor or very poor in the majority of the wheat in the plains. That's not necessarily what people want to hear, although Missouri looks really good right now.
Yeah, you probably got a better feel for this than I do, coming from wheat country. But yeah, some of the plains areas are looking like they're hurting a little bit. But um, that's the one advantage that wheat has, is it's so geographically diverse, right? That if it's struggling in one area, it's maybe doing a little better in another area. So,
And then if you look at the Pacific Northwest, it looks like they're actually in really good shape this year
yeah,
for their winter wheat crop. So I'll
yeah.
have to keep an eye on that and see what's going on there.
Looking at that map, I didn't realize California planted as much wheat as what they apparently do. So,
Yeah, I remember from the past, I believe the reason they always have such a good rating is a lot of it's irrigated. So that's why it always shows up good to excellent. This is interesting here. Now, what are we looking at here on this precip map here? This is as of today on Tuesday?
just cumulative rainfall through next Tuesday, and it kind of shows that there's, you should expect something here in the next 8-9 days. And looking at my area there in Northwest Iowa, a little over an inch, 1.4 inches is what it's calling for. Most of that's going to come here on Thursday, it looks like.
Well, I think this is what we already had, isn't it, for the past few days?
Yeah. So we're just going to continue to kind of get scattered showers, basically. Yeah, this is a little bit longer term forecast. 15-day weather anomaly just kind of shows what kind of stuck out to me. You look at that central Missouri area where it's leaning drier. It doesn't mean they aren't going to get any rain, but and that's one of the areas that was so wet, especially in that eastern corn belt. And now it's going to dry out, and so it's going to shift the other way, which I would think would probably be welcome for a lot of the growers there. But it's going to pick up a little bit. A couple inches more above average in a lot of those areas, and into Iowa and northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin.
The thing that catches my eye there too is the Dakotas. I had heard there was going to be a lot more corn in the Dakotas this year, but it doesn't look real favorable for that.
Well, it's still have plenty of time, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. That's a big debate, right? Justin was talking about our CommStock report this morning that you could add another 1 million acres of corn yet to the most recent prospective planning update with 95.3, and so I don't know. I don't see a lot of people making huge shifts at this point, but I suppose a lot of those might come from cotton down in the south, because they reduced cotton acres, and cotton's only gone lower since then, and so it might make people second guess if they want to plant as many cotton acres as what they suggested. And so I think you can see a shift there, but I don't know. In soybeans, I don't know that you're going to see a big change there, but you might add a little bit of corn. I could see adding some, but I don't know about 1 million. That seems like a lot.
So if you look at the streak you were just talking about, where you have all the brown colors here, man, that's where we've had all the horrific flooding here lately. And it looks like that entire pattern over the next 2 weeks is going to shift west about, maybe 200 or 300 miles and go right over the Corn Belt instead.
Shift west and north where it needs it, and shift away from where it doesn't need it, I guess. So
maybe now Ohio, which has been totally saturated, maybe they'll be able to get something done finally.
Yeah. You would think so.
So what do you hear about the river systems? There's been so much rain coming down the Ohio and from Carroll, Illinois, all the way south. What's that doing for backing up barge traffic and that sort of thing?
Well, I haven't seen it lately, but it seems like the Mississippi just fluctuates way more than it used to. That's my impression. It's like we hear about a lot more, that one moment it's way down and then it's up and down, and it just didn't seem to fluctuate quite as much, and as um, but yeah, I think it's doing a lot better. I would think a lot of these rains that the Eastern Corn Belt has been getting would trickle down into the river, and so it would pick up, I would think, eventually. But not that it's going back as high as its highest level, but I would think it'd be okay.
All right, now here's a look at the temperature anomalies. Now, this is interesting because from everything I've heard throughout the winter, the north has stayed cold. The soil temperatures have been cold because it was so dry, the frost went deeper. What do you hear now?
Well, it's all relative. Cold is cold, but it's this is showing that our weather anomaly, we're going to have above average temperatures. And so maybe instead of 20 degrees, you're going to have 23 degrees, with 23 degrees still cold, right? But it's above average, and so for much of the state of Iowa, a little over 4 inches warmer than average, and so that just helps that it's going to keep the frost away, and we're still month of April and early May, it's happened where in early May you still get some frost damage, especially in some of the soybeans. And so I think at one point you got to get past May 13th. I read at one point where that risk of frost drops to near zero. And so we still got 3 weeks left where there's some of that risk of frost coming. But this kind of shows that there's nothing on the horizon, at least in kind of the central corn belt. Not obviously in the northern part, they haven't started planting yet because it's still too cold. They haven't started anything in North Dakota yet, but this is just basically gives ammunition that the planting, as long as it warms up or stays above average, that the planting progress is can continue to move at a quick pace.
Good point. Well, let's head south. Let's talk about South America for a little bit. This is kind of your second home. Let's talk about what's going on in Brazil. They have a corn crop to bring up yet.
Yeah, they've had really good rainfall in April, and obviously that's one of the things that I look for is they need to meet their production goals. They need solid rain through April, and ideally through kind of the initial part of May. They'd love it if they got good rainfall through the month of May, but that's kind of asking a lot because, frankly, the rainy season starts to slow down in April and kind of come to a close in May. I don't have the number in front of me, but I want to say maybe they average 4 inches and something like that in April, and then maybe an inch or two in May, and so they've actually been above average. I think they've gotten like over 6 inches in April, and so it just kind of gives a signal that their crop is developing well for the most part. You can always find some areas that have gotten some damage, but they're going to get 1 to 2 inches here through the end of April, through the 28th is what it looks like in Mato Grosso and a good part of Mato Grosso do Sul. It's maybe a little bit drier in kind of the southwest region of Goiás, which there is a lot of second crop corn there. Paraná in the south is, they're going to get 3 inches, it looks like, for most of the state. And that's the second largest safrinha corn production state. The only area that doesn't look like it's going to get anything this next week is Rio Grande do Sul there in the white area in the very deep part of the south. But they're in the middle of their soybean harvest, and they don't plant any second crop corn. And so it really isn't going to affect much of anything. Maybe in the parts of Argentina to the west there where they neighbor Argentina. But Rio Grande do Sul has just had a rough season where they go from one extreme to the other. It's either way too wet or way too dry. I was talking to someone the other day that had a relative that said they were harvesting 8 bushel beans in Rio Grande do Sul. And so at this point, more or less rain isn't going to affect anything because they're all over halfway done there in that state. And, they're pretty much overall, they're 95% done, I think, with the soybean harvest. And so they're kind of at the tail end, and so the weather isn't going to impact it too much. It's just mostly on the safrinha corn yet, and so we still see some rain coming into the early May, and so it would indicate that the longer that goes on, that they'll reach the USDA's corn production goals of 126 million metric tons.
Well, okay, let's talk about the export situation. China and Brazil, they have gotten pretty cozy here lately. Explain what we're looking at here when it comes to imports and exports between the two.
They've been getting cozy, and they're going to get cozier. It sounds like, I think it's dawning on most of the mainstream media, and everyone's talking about how this trade wars are just going to, completely push China away from U.S. purchases and push them into Brazil, and that's kind of already been happening for even before the first kind of trade war or phase one trade negotiation that we had with China. It was been happening, but this stuff like this, these trade wars, just kind of accelerate it. And so, the one I put this chart together, the reason for that is you hear a lot about how, the assumption is made that China needs U.S. soybeans, and I'm basically putting this chart together to show what is Brazil's export capacity in soybeans, and you kind of see what it's grown to over the years. And just 5 years ago, it was at 81.6 million metric tons, and China was importing 98.5 million metric tons. Now it's starting to pull ahead, where Brazil is now outproducing what China's demands are, and that's a problem for everybody because the world's largest soybean buyer customer has been China, and their growth, it looks like it's been stagnating. Their protein demands have been stagnating. You can see that they're 104 a couple of years ago, million metric tons, 105 last year, and now it's projected to go down a couple million metric tons by the USDA. And so for the first time, you're seeing that U.S. Brazil soybean exports are outpacing China's purchases, which in theory, that would suggest that Brazil could single-handedly supply all of China's soybean demands. Now, that may not be the case. Brazil is going to sell to other countries, and they might still buy a little bit from the United States, but it's probably going to be quite a bit less. Well, at least the longer while we don't have any deals to be made. Now, beans, I noticed, are up a little bit today. They're up 7 cents right now. It's not the close, and a lot of that is just based off of some chatter that the U.S. is suggesting they got a trade deal worked out with Japan and India. And so they're in the middle of all these negotiations, and we don't have a lot of information. We don't have any specifics on what are we getting out of these trade disputes and what is being done. But so it's just speculation, right? But just based on the speculation, we're up 7 cents in the beans. And so the market wants to see some resolution to these trade wars. But I guess what I'm trying to debunk, maybe that's the right word, is the myth or the idea that China needs our beans, and maybe there's a time for that, but these trade wars didn't come as a big surprise to China, because we did this in Trump's first term, and he's continued this rhetoric that he's gonna have a tariff fight with China and perhaps other countries, and so you actually digging into the numbers, it would suggest that Brazil, if they wanted to, and if China wanted to bid them up, they could buy every single soybean that Brazil had available for export, and that they'd be okay. They would meet their needs. And so that's basically what I was trying to point out with this chart.
Makes you wonder if China's going to own a bunch of Brazil farm ground.
Well, I would say no. They're actually, this is probably going back maybe 15 years. There was a lot of chatter back in Brazil at that time, and I can't remember the exact year. I could look it up pretty quick, but I want to say at least 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more, that there was that concern, right, that China was going to come in and buy up big chunks of the Amazon and start food production. And the Attorney General of Brazil reinterpreted the law on foreign ownership and basically said that foreigners couldn't buy the land outright, or they had to have a Brazilian citizen be a majority owner. of the farmland, and that kind of really slowed a lot of the foreign ownership of land at that point. Now, whoever owned land at that point was grandfathered in. I was already there at that point, so it didn't affect me so much. But it basically, I think it was a little bit of an overreaction to concern of that. And so I think that there definitely was interest from China on owning land. But what it did do is kind of shifted their resources into other things, into infrastructure like port infrastructure, setting up grain terminals within the country. And so it's not very hard to, you can find COFCO storage units, facilities, buying stations scattered around Brazil. You see Chinese symbols, driving through the countryside and the frontier. So they're going directly there. I mean, they need these soybeans, but unfortunately, I don't know where that's going to leave the U.S. producer in terms of soybean production. We're just going to have to, develop our own renewable diesel or our own domestic demand ourselves.
Well, I had heard, of course, that Chinese and their population had really developed a taste for U.S. beef over the years as their economic class had risen, if you will. And I just wondered how things are doing now with their economy supposedly not so good here lately.
We talk a lot about soybeans and even corn, but it's really China's trying to buy up everything, and Brazil is expanding and taking market share from other supplies too. So it's all different types of protein, including animal protein. And this is a chart that Bloomberg put together that I thought really did a good job of kind of expressing what is going on in the meat complex, and how, in the case of beef, Brazil has dramatically expanded their beef exports. And again, China is a big factor in that. I think China represents probably half of Brazil's beef exports in terms of what they're buying, and so they're exporting quite a bit more. It's grown by 8% just in the last 5 years of market share that they've taken away from other countries, including the United States, and so it's, from 1 year to the next, it's maybe just 1 or 2%, not huge amounts, but over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, it starts to become significant, and that's essentially what's happening. Same thing is going to happen in coffee. I read something this morning that actually suggests it's going to happen in fruit. So you could pretty much take your pick of different commodities, and how much Brazil is kind of taking market share away from other countries, and as they've kind of cozied up to China, that's their number one buyer, and so they're trying to get along with China a little bit more, just because they've become more highly dependent on them. The U.S. I think has still been dependent on China a little bit more than what people realize, but not to the extent that Brazil is. I mean, Brazil, if there is no other buyer that's going to replace China in the case of Brazil, and so they're highly dependent on them.
Well, and obviously Brazil beef producers are capitalizing on the shortage of the U.S. beef herd, which has been really constricted now for several years. Maybe about 3 years down the road, if we can get our herd rebuilt, maybe that'll shut those numbers back down a little bit.
And at JBS, which is obviously a Brazilian company, I mean, they're well established in all over the world, in both countries, and so they can easily press a lever and kind of shift supply from, in terms of exports of, okay, this buyer, this country, Japan, or whoever wants beef, we're going to send it from the U.S., we're going to send it from Brazil, where's it going to come from? And so they can, manage that global supply pretty easily.
Well, as we get into next week, it should be interesting to see just how much planning progress we have. Gosh, we're not very far away from May now at this point.
Nope, it'll be here pretty quickly.
So you said you may head out to the field here later on today or tomorrow?
I'm hoping later today. So I'm hoping if we talk again next week, I'm hoping I get all my crops in. But I'll get some of them in. But it depends on assuming we have no breakdowns, I should get most of it in.
Well, that would be great. Well, give us an update if you would next week, and we'll see how things are going, what conditions are like, and how the weather is holding up too. Appreciate the update there, Matthew. Take care of yourself. Be safe out there. Matthew Kruse, the president of CommStock, with us. And that'll do it for this episode. Appreciate you joining us. For producer Brianne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling, and we'll catch you next time here on the CommStock Channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.